dad was a hobbyist. He was a kind of a hobbyist guitar player, and he had a classical guitar that he had made for him in Brooklyn in 1957. So when I was about, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 years old, we would sit around, and that was a time in this country where everybody would get together and after dinner and gather on the front porch or the back porch and, you know, talk about the day. And for my family, it was we would sing songs, and my dad would play a little bit of a guitar. We'd sing stuff like On Top of Old Smoky, Jimmy Crack Corn, She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain, all that stuff. And that was my first introduction to, I guess, to, you know, close introduction to someone playing and being involved in singing and listening to music. And then I got bit by the bug in 1963 when the Beatles came to America, and I got like thousands of other kids, you know, once I heard that, and I watched them on Ed Sullivan, and I said, that's it, I know what I want to do now. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be one of them. I wanted to learn how to play guitar. I wanted to be a part of a band, and I took some lessons from a really cool guy. His name was Ray Lungabardi, and he taught at Giffords Lane Music on Staten Island. And I took about 6 months of lessons from him, and then he went to Vietnam. And the other teachers there were kind of old and doty, and they weren't cool guys to hang around with or to be around. Ray was a really cool guy. Drove a convertible, had slick back hair, kind of looked a little like Elvis, and he was my first guitar teacher. And I learned enough from him to be able to take that knowledge and then teach myself. And that was the beginning of the British invasion, and Led Zeppelin, Jeff Beck, Rod Stewart, the Small Faces, Cream, Blind Faith, Traffic, and not only the bands in this country, but there was so many artists coming over from the UK, and it just spoke to me, you know, and I started playing in, you know, small bands around the Staten Island area, around my house, high school dances, and you know, frat parties, and we played at Rutgers. We used to do frat parties at beer blasts at Rutgers. And one of my first bands that I was in was myself and Tommy Price, Joan Jett's drummer. He's been Joan's drummer for about 30 years now. Yeah, that's just how it started. I just continually found new people to play with, and more musicians and different configurations of the same bands, and that was the beginning of my professional career. There used to be a venue in Staten Island called the Ritz, and it was promoter conglomerate days where, you know, there's only a couple of real big promoters in the country right now. It's like Live Nation or AIG or AGI and a few others, but for the most part, if most of the venues are owned by the big conglomerates, and back then there was a lot more mom and pop promoters, and so people would come to New York City to play, but before they actually went into the city, they would come to Staten Island and play this small 1,400 seat theater called the Ritz in Port Richmond. So I saw the James Gang there. I saw Jeff Beck there. I saw Yes, Mountain, Cactus. There were all these bands that on their way into Manhattan would stop on Staten Island, and and perform. So that was probably, I was about 14, I think, at the time, maybe 14 or 15 years old, and seeing all these amazing acts come through. Iggy Pop, MC5. Yeah, everybody played Staten Island before they played New York City. There was a handful of people on Staten Island that managed to leave and become successful in the music scene, in the rock music scene in the early 70s and mid 70s. And one of them was a guy by the name of Earl Slick, who is a very, very dear friend of mine. And I grew up going to high school dances and seeing his band there used to be in a band called Mack Truck, and they were amazing. And he was just like the consummate rock star in 1971, you know, or 72. He just looked the part, and he's a great guitar player. And we became friends, and then he got an amazing gig playing with David Bowie, and he was on the Diamond Dogs tour. I think it was 73 or something, like maybe 74. And Slick kind of took me under his wing. He kind of mentored me when I was younger, and introduced me to a whole stable of people that I never otherwise, had I not known Slick, I never would have gotten to meet. And through Slick and a few other people, I became friends with people like Mick Ronson. I used to go to Mick's house when I was 17 or 18 years old and sit on his couch with him and Susie. Watch the Johnny Carson show. There was also, Michael Kamen, who was a very, very famous and successful movie scorer and composer and orchestrator. And he was one of my first big people that more famous people that I met and got to pal around with. It was an amazing time. I mean, I remember I was playing with Cherry Vanilla at the time. I was playing piano in her band, and her managers, these two guys, Max and Mike, lived on the west side, like 80th, somewhere in the 80s, in Amsterdam Avenue, and right next door to their apartment was Blondie, and she was just starting out, and then Patti Smith was a close friend of Cherry's as well. So there was this whole scene in Manhattan at that time in the early 70s, Max's Kansas City, Gildersleeves, Club 82. It was just filled with all kinds of different kinds of music and really kooky people, CBGBs, and it was a great time for music in New York City. I heard about an audition that was that Todd Rundgren was looking for a bass player, that his bass player had left and they were short a member, and would I be interested in going up to Woodstock and auditioning for the band. I was all about, advancing my career and trying to get to the next level. So I borrowed some dough from my uncle, and I took an Adirondack Trailways bus up to Woodstock, New York. I met with Roger Powell and Willie Wilcox, the keyboard player and the drummer in the band. Todd was in India, mopeding across southern India at the time, and he was due home in a couple days. He said, "Listen, we've already tried out 7 people. You're kind of our last hope. We're hoping that this works out. We're not really thrilled about anybody." I played for a day with Roger and Willie. They taught me some material, and then the next day Todd came back, and I played for him along with the other 2 guys, and so we played as a band together. I was 20 years old, or I just turned 20 actually, and Todd didn't want me in the band. He said he's never been on the road before. He's never made a record before. He's too green. We have to go with our last choice, which is Tony Sales, and he was the bass player prior to to that version of Utopia. He had been in the band before. It was the Hunt and Tony Sales and Todd. That was the original first version of Utopia. And Roger and Willie, to their credit, said, "No, we think this guy is great. Let's give him a shot. Let's see how it works out." And Todd begrudgingly said yes, and I was welcomed into Utopia at 20 years old, and went from never leave. The furthest that I had gotten from New York City was the Jersey Shore and the Adirondack Mountains in a car. And next thing I know, I'm on a plane, a four-seater Cessna with a hole in the floor, and a female pilot smoking a cigarette, and I'm going from Kingston, New York to Binghamton for the first show, for the first Utopia show. And that's really where my career started, was right there, and it's all thanks to Slick and a couple of other people that really believed in me and wanted to help me. Utopia wound up being, I was in the band for 10 years, and we did some great music together, great work together. We had some really good times, really hard times, and it was a lot of fun. And it really kind of cemented my position in the music industry with other people, with peers of mine who really enjoyed the music that we were doing, that we created. I was lucky enough to have penned the biggest song that Utopia did as a band, called "Set Me Free." I wrote it by myself. And brought it to the band, and then between Todd and Roger and Willie, it became. I think we had a top 30 hit with it. It was the top 30 for a couple of 3 weeks, and that was a real big feather in my cap. And then, like everything in life, with bands and with music, and it just kind of runs its course. It runs its course, and you go to the next thing. You go to the next level, and. Utopia finished as a band in 1986. We did our last tour. I kind of floated around for a little while, and then I wound up playing with Joan Jett for 3 years, from 87, 88, 89. And from Joan, I went to Hall & Oates, and I played with Daryl and John for 3 years, from 89, 90, 91. In 92, I was kind of looking for other stuff to do, and then I got a call. I've been lucky enough in my career that I play on other people's records a lot, and one of them was Meatloaf. I played bass, thanks to Todd, because he produced the first Bat Out of Hell record, and I got a call from Meatloaf in 1993. In June of '93, that he was going out on the road behind his new album, Bat Out of Hell 2. And I wound up being with Meatloaf, or playing in Meatloaf's band, for the next 17 years. So from 93 to 2010, I was in Meatloaf's band. And among other bands, too. I mean, I also, during that time period, played with Richie Sambora, played with Todd. I did some other shows with other bands, and conglomerations of things here and there. I've been blessed in my career. I've been a very, very lucky person. And in 2010, I left Meatloaf, and it was a great gig for a good chunk of time, but it was time for me to go. And I've been playing with Todd ever since, like I always have since 1976. So now I'm out on the road with Todd right now. And I have my own career. I have my solo career. It's amazing what I've done. It's pretty amazing.